In the year 2011, a group of individuals formed a political group called the Christian Democratic Party USA. As the name suggests, it adhered to the ideology of Christian democracy. For those unaware, I actually have a full video on that subject that I made very early on. Christian democracy is a political ideology that emerged in 19th century Europe under the influence of Catholic social. Yeah, on second thought, I'm actually just going to explain it again. The TLDR is that it basically means that they are right-wing on social issues and left-wing on economic issues. For example, being opposed to the death penalty, abortion, and gay rights, but also for expanding the welfare state, single-payer healthcare, and being skeptical of free market capitalism. As their party had just begun, they had not developed the proper infrastructure to run their own presidential nominee, so they ended up endorsing the independent candidacy of Average Joe Schreiner, a perennial candidate making his third bid for the White House. However, Schreiner's bid for the presidency did not manage to get on the ballot anywhere, so he didn't get a single vote. Afterwards, the party had officially changed its name to the American Solidarity Party, which took its name from the Polish trade union. As 2016 was entering the scene, a lot of social conservatives were a bit too hesitant to support Republican frontrunner Donald Trump. Not only because he was a bit too erratic for them, but he also campaigned a lot less socially conservative, particularly when it came to gay rights. And even though Trump did try to win them back by picking one of the most homophobic people you can think of to be his running mate, for a select few, it just wasn't cutting it. So they needed to turn to any other alternative option. The problem was, not a lot of options were available to them that actually tickled that particular niche. Basically, any other right-wing leaning candidate had positive views on gay people this election. I mean, unless you wanted to go all the way down to the level of Daryl Castle, but at that point, what's really the difference between voting for Daryl Castle as a protest vote as opposed to voting for one of these two? Some even went so far as to say, at that point, what's the difference between voting for them or Hillary Clinton? Because at least that protest vote would actually possibly change the results of the election. If you thought all that was confusing already, then the American Solidarity Party entered the scene and decided to make the case that voting for any of those ones would essentially be voting for a political reason, would be a moral or religious reason, painting themselves as the real Christian party. Holding an online convention on July 9th, 2016, where they nominated college professor Dr. Amira Zarvan for president and author Mike Maturin for VP. However, for unknown reasons, Zarvan decided to suspend his bid for the presidency, so they shifted Maturin to the top of the ticket, and businessman Juan Munoz was chosen to be his running mate. The ASP managed to get on the ballot only in Colorado and get write-in access in 25 more states. And it just so happened that the party was in the right place at the right time because, as I stated previously, a decent number of deeply religious conservatives who did not want to vote for anyone else decided to cast the ballot for them instead, the most notable ones being Catholic apologetic author Mark P. Shee and political scientist Peter Lawler. However, the other four choices were more practical, so Maturin only ended up getting 6,697 votes. Now you'd think that this would not be that good, but this seemed to actually bode well for them, which I will explain in the beginning of the next section. As is usually the case, after the 2016 election, interest in third parties began to grow. While a majority of this momentum went to the usual suspects for various reasons, the ASP, as I said previously, was in the right place at the right time to make decent gains as well. Because unlike other third parties that usually try to siphon off support from a larger party by going for a niche group or a group that is not really that well liked within a larger party, the ASP actually could run to a group that didn't really have any political options, at least no one that could fulfill all of their needs. As a report done by the voter study group showed that the second largest voting bloc in the 2016 election was people who were socially conservative but economically leftist. Said group was labeled populists, but that's not necessarily an accurate title. And what usually ended up happening was that eventually they would just pick one of the two sides that they cared about more and just voted along that line. So with this large voting bloc that doesn't necessarily have a party that meets all of their particular needs, the ASP could easily swoop in and become their voice. There was just one problem though. As a newer party, it was very tough to enter the scene. In 2017, they only had the resources to run one candidate in a state house seat in New Jersey, getting dead last. And in the 2018 midterms, they had to run two candidates as unaffiliated in California, Desmond Silvera for governor and Brian Carroll in California District 22. The latter race being another example of them being in the right place at the right time. The Lord works in mysterious ways, I guess. The reason being was that the incumbent in that race, Devin Nunes, was in a hefty amount of hot water involving the Trump-Russia investigation, and this race became very high profile. While Carroll did not make it to the second round, he actually managed to still make an impact because the Democrat in the race apparently faked an endorsement from Carroll in order to boost his chances in the general election. But yeah, electorally wise, the party didn't really have much to say for the midterms. Keeping the third-party cycle tradition alive, the rise in support for third parties in the last cycle led to some high expectations for this one. The ASP was in a position where pressure was not too bad. It's not like they were the Libertarians or the Greens. If they gain, good. If not, so what? They had steadily been growing since the last cycle, so now they had a more longer and more formal way to pick a candidate. And they needed it because more than one person actually saw their nomination. First, we have programmer Joshua Perkins, who it seems dropped out at some point during the cycle. But the larger battle came between their first endorsement, Average Joe Schreiner, running against one of their actual prominent members, Brian Carroll. Carroll ended up getting the nomination, and Illinois Solidarity Party chair Amar Patel was chosen as running mate. Well, the ASP didn't have to push hard for a big W in 2020. It seems that they did put the effort to, making themselves readily available for questionnaires and forums, appearing at an event with Joe Walsh and Tulsi Gabbard, appearing at all 3 free and equal debates, and even starting their own podcast to get their message across. They ended up getting on the ballot in 8 states, larger than their entire ballot access in the last cycle, and write-in access in 31 more, plus Guam. They ultimately got 42,305 votes. A vast improvement. I understand that they were already growing, but how did they get a vote total this big in a short amount of time? If you'll indulge me, this may be another case of them being in the right place at the right time, because during the 2020 cycle, there was actually another minor party candidate who was pushing for a platform that was remarkably similar to the American Solidarity Party's platform. That candidate being Kanye West. Well, yes, West's last minute run was very hectic and very, insane, but if you actually look at his platform and the things that he stood for, you'll see there are a lot of similarities to what the ASP was advocating for that very same cycle. A consistent life ethic, meaning opposing both abortion and the death penalty, extreme religious elements, environmental stewardship. I don't have formal proof of this, and I don't know if the ASP might like to hear this, especially nowadays, but what I believe might have happened is that Kanye West's sort of strange political candidacy at the last minute might have influenced some people to maybe look at the idea of Christian democracy and stuff more seriously, and in turn might have risen support for the American Solidarity Party. 2020 had begun a major shift for minor parties. First, again keeping up with the tradition of the third party cycle, support basically went down the drain. But also, there was some room for shifting, as many of the larger voices within the third party sphere for a while had started to make some changes. New leadership within the Libertarian Party to basically kick out the Johnson wing of the party, internal struggle with the Green Party caused by some bad faith actors, and seemingly the most permanent one coming from the fact that the Constitution Party was just not being able to get any support. Even though there was a rise in paleo-conservative youth, they weren't joining the Constitution Party, they were instead just trying to enter the GOP, and if they didn't want to go in the GOP, they would just go to the newly reformed Libertarian Party, which was basically becoming paleo-conservative to a degree. So now the position of third largest third party was empty, and now everybody wanted a chance to fill the hole. But one major problem was a lot of them just blended in with each other, so it was hard for them to gain enough support to fill in the gap when they have to fight with like 3 other parties that basically espouse the exact same thing as them. And, say it with me now, this put the American Solidarity Party in the right place at the right time, because they didn't have to battle anybody else for any support. They were literally the only party in America that espoused this particular branch and ideology that actually could get them momentum on both sides of the aisle. So, they literally could do a lot of things with what they were given, which has even led to them to be called the fastest growing third party. The first test of this came from the California recall election, where they nominated Dr. James Hanink, albeit not formally as an ASP candidate due to ballot access. He ended up getting 7,193 votes, almost double what Desmond got. And when the normally scheduled election happened the following year, he would end up getting 10,110 votes. Again, gaining some momentum. The California Solidarity Party even went so far as to try to run a whole slate, but unfortunately, they were only able to run Hanink, and the rest had to run as write-in candidates. The only candidate they could get on the ballot on is in Washington, but that's because in that state, you literally can print whatever you want on there as your ballot line. Due to these snags, the ASP actually decided to change up their strategy for the 2022 midterms. That strategy being choosing to endorse other candidates instead of running their own. From what I gathered, they only did it for 2 races. The first one might not be too surprising, Independent Evan McMullin in the Utah Senate seat. The other one might be a little surprising, them endorsing Chris Butler in the Democratic primary for Illinois District 1. Although Chris Butler is a center-right pastor that opposed abortion, so it's not really that surprising. It's only surprising because they endorsed a major party candidate. And with that, we have reached the most recent developments of the American Solidarity Party. What, did you expect the next party history video to be like 50 minutes long? Oh, I'm sorry that I can't fulfill your ever so growing expectations. So to all you syncretic, sin-hating rosary rattlers, will you rise up to the mat or end up mounted on a piece of plywood? Thanks for watching this video. Be sure to like, comment, share, and subscribe, and click the bell to notify when a future video of mine comes out. And if you're interested in more content from me, you can go to my website, follow me on Twitter, join my Discord, or consider supporting me on Patreon.